Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving deep into the American Civil War. Specifically, what were those deep, foundational cracks that finally split the nation in two?
Long before the first shots rang out, the United States was, in a lot of ways, already two completely different countries, just living under one flag. On one side, you had a world of factories and manufacturing, and on the other, plantations and an economy built on enslaved labor. This is the story of how those two Americas finally and violently collided.
All right, so let's get right into it. This fundamental divide really starts with their economies.
You've got a nation literally split down the middle by two completely different economic engines. Up north, industry was king. We're talking factories, manufacturing, lots of small farms. But down south? Well, that's where wealth grew right out of the ground, on these enormous plantations focused on cash crops.
So, when we say industrial, what does that actually mean? Well, for the North, it meant relying on machinery and, importantly, paid labor to crank out most of America's goods. It created a society built around cities and people earning a wage for their work.
And on the flip side, agricultural meant the South's entire fortune was tied directly to the land. We're talking about incredibly labor-intensive crops like cotton and tobacco that, you guessed it, needed a massive, massive workforce to turn a profit.
And right here, this is the absolute heart of the matter. Southern planters were convinced that their whole economy, their wealth, their entire way of life was only profitable because it was built on the backs of enslaved African Americans, on forced unpaid labor. The whole system depended on it.
So, this massive conflict brings us to a really important word you've got to remember: secede. It just means to formally withdraw or leave a nation. And, well, it's the action that's eventually going to tear the entire country apart.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about the human element, about how people actively fought back against this brutal system.
Now, one of the most incredible forms of resistance was the Underground Railroad. And like the caption says, it wasn't actually underground, and it definitely wasn't a railroad. It was this secret, incredibly brave network of routes and safe houses that people used to escape slavery and find freedom in the North.
And this resistance, it took so many different forms. You had people like Nat Turner in Virginia leading organized and, bloody revolts. You had white abolitionists like John Brown staging violent raids, trying to arm enslaved people. And then you had absolute legends like Harriet Tubman, a conductor who risked everything to guide countless people to freedom. But as you can imagine, this resistance was met with just an incredible amount of fear and, frankly, brutal oppression. Take Nat Turner's revolt. It absolutely terrified slaveholders in Virginia. And their response? To pass even harsher, more restrictive laws to clamp down on the enslaved population.
These laws were called Black Codes, and they were designed for one purpose: to crush any and all hope of future rebellion. They made it illegal for enslaved people to even meet up together. It became illegal for them to learn to read or write, and they even made it a crime for anyone to speak out against slavery.
So, you see, this conflict wasn't just playing out on plantations or along secret escape routes. Nope. It escalated all the way to the halls of Congress, and it was threatening to break the entire nation.
As America started expanding westward, this huge question kept coming up over and over again. Would these new states be free states or slave states? And this wasn't just some small debate. It was a massive political fight every single time. So why did it matter so much? Well, it all came down to one thing: the balance of power.
So you had the Northerners who were really against slavery expanding, pushing for these new states to be free states. But on the other side, Southerners absolutely needed them to be slave states if they wanted to hold on to their political power back in Washington, D.C.
And for the South, you have to understand, this was a life-or-death battle. Every single new state threatened to tip the scales. Because if the free states got a clear majority in Congress, well, they'd have the votes to ban slavery completely. And that would totally dismantle the Southern economy and their entire way of life.
And then came the final trigger, the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Southern states looked at his anti-slavery stance and basically thought, okay, the fight is over, we've lost. So they started to do the unthinkable. One by one, they began to secede from the Union and formed their very own nation, the Confederate States of America.
And that right there, that set the stage for the final, and at this point, probably inevitable showdown. A confrontation between two leaders and two totally different visions for what America should be.
And it really all boiled down to two completely opposed beliefs. On one hand, you have Abraham Lincoln, who believed the Union was permanent, that you just couldn't break it. But for Jefferson Davis and the new Confederacy, they believed states had the right to secede, to leave, especially to protect their property. And let's be crystal clear, when they said property, they meant enslaved people.
And then came the spark that lit the whole powder keg. April 12, 1861. Confederate troops fired on Fort Sumter, which was a U.S. federal fort right there in South Carolina. And just like that, the debate was over. The military conflict had begun.
With those first shots, all those years of tense political compromises and social divisions, they just came to a violent, crashing end. Those deep cracks we talked about, they finally shattered the whole foundation. The Civil War was on.
And you know, it leaves us with this big question that still echoes today. Can a nation that's built on two completely different worlds ever really truly be united? That brutal, bloody fight, it was all about forging a single unified identity. And that was the real heart of the Civil War.